And that was the one, or one of many pieces of advice that Lars gave me. He said, Stacy, you have to fight with the camera. You are too nice to the camera. You have to fight. If the camera is in front of you, the camera is in your way. And it was such a contradictory thought, but in the same time, it freed me up totally. And it took the responsibility that I was taking on my shoulders of being filmed. It took it away. And I just thought, it is not my job to be filmed. It is the DP's job to film me. My job is to act.
Filmmaker Magazine presents Back to One with Peter Rinaldi.
Stacy Martin is an actor. She sat down with me in cyberspace to talk about the work.
Is there a typical way you like to begin your process of inhabiting a character?
There's a way that I like to start, and then there's the way that I end up starting. I always think, if I get this part, this is going to be the moment where I just do everything that I want to be doing in my process. And it's going to be the best process I'm ever going to go through. And it's going to be absolutely amazing. And then I get into my room and panic sets in. And I'm just like, oh God, here we go. What do I do? What do I do? How do I do this? How do I act? Who's my character? There's all these insane questions come to my mind. So the one thing I always start by doing is reading the script over and over and over again. It's the one thing that kind of brings me back to the story and gives me a connection and a way of entering the story, but in a very specific way where I start to see what's necessary of me. Because it changes so much it changes also because of the director that you're working with. Some directors love rehearsals. Some directors love spending time with actors, not necessarily on the script, but just hanging out and talking. And some others, you just arrive on the day, you do your scene, and that's it. So the process is so different every time that for me, reading a script, something happens unconsciously to your mind and to the way that you're soaking the story up, and the way you might be picking up on things that your brain might not fully yet comprehend, but maybe on day 16 of shooting, you'll be like, oh, that little nugget of information, this is what it is. And you have to give space for that to happen. So for me, reading is that entry point.
And this is so interesting because a lot of actors have said a similar thing, but this is the first time I'm processing, like, it's almost like you're a sponge. Your mind is a sponge and you don't know what it's picking up. You have to almost keep going over it because that subconscious firings are going to pay the dividends later on. Yeah. In ways you might not know.
And you have to trust that. You have to trust that your body is taking all of this information, and your job, I think, like you said, is to be that sponge and to amass as much as you can. And then so that when you get to set, when you do the scenes, it's just pouring out. Like you don't have control on it. And it's really hard because there are so many factors that come into acting on set and doing a scene and you know, but I think the most exciting way of working is when you've almost over prepared and you have to let everything go, because you're just like, I've done as much as I could. I have done the best to my ability. And now I have to trust that. And I have to trust myself, which is also then a whole other issue.
Before we started recording, you said you didn't go to drama school, but what was the Actors Temple?
Sort of, I guess, the equivalent of a studio in America. So it was founded by a student who had studied Meisner in New York. And so they really they focus on Meisner, and they did these courses and these classes. And I did an introductory course, and it just, any preconception or any knowledge of what acting was until then completely just was shattered.
Wow.
And it was the most exhilarating, the most fascinating, confusing, terrifying experience. And I loved it. And I remember leaving that course. It was a 1-week course, and I signed up the last day. I was like, I'm coming back, and I'm staying for 6 months every day.
Mm.
And it changed my life.
So how long was this before your first movie? Like, were you in the rounds after this training before Nymphomaniac?
So I auditioned for that probably, it all started to happen a month before I finished. And I remember going in and thinking, this is insane. I'm about to finish my training and I'm having this amazing experience, but I don't know if I want it to be my job. For me, it was just this incredible time, and I loved it, and I wanted to continue doing it, but I didn't know whether or not it was going to be my job. And I did the audition, and I thought, well, I can't say no to audition for Lars von Trier. It would be lunacy. And then 2 weeks before we finished, they said, "Oh, you've got the part." And so I pretty much had about 3 weeks once I finished the course, and then started prep, and then was in Germany for a really long time, just doing my first film, which is weird and great.
It almost feels like the way you're talking about it, like that intensive really prepared you so much for that experience, right?
What I loved about being in the studio, and specifically with this one teacher who I still work with now as my coach on a lot of the roles that I prep, is that you just do it every day. And by the natural act of doing the same thing every day, you build a muscle, you build resilience, you build stamina. And I think it kind of, I was almost I was sort of, it was the perfect situation for me to go into a film, because my body, and I was ready. I was like, yeah, I know what I'm doing. I was excited. I was inspired. I was very scared, but it was a good fear.
You've talked about how Lars really allowed you to play and allowed for freedom in your space as an actor, but also was really precise. And from my talks with actors, those two ingredients really seem like, from a director, really seem like that's the real magic thing. Like freedom, but precision of like vision or whatever, or what he wants or she wants. Do you think that was like setting you up for disappointment with with other work? You know what I mean? Like this doesn't seem like it's the norm, right?
I think that's what makes a great director. I think the ability to let liberty exist in chaos, and have the confidence and the talent to capture it. It's a really tough skill. And that's why you have greats. Like, I think Jane Campion, whatever her process is, I find that there's a lot of liberty in how she films actors, because you see it in their face, you see it in their emotions, you see it in the way that she frames them. Or you have it as well with someone who's very precise, like Tarantino. I find his vision, as precise and specific as it is, there's also this complete freedom that the actors completely give over to, and it's so exciting. But it's definitely hard, because for me, when I came out of Nymphomaniac, the script was 300 pages. I'd been on set for 6 months. I'd had this wonderful experience as a lead role. I'd worked with incredible people, and I suddenly had done this film, and I thought, well, this is what it is. This is what every experience is going to be like. Being an actor is incredible. And then you start to realize that not everyone is like that, and it's not a bad thing, but you have to give space for people to be different. And as an actor, you have no choice on that, because you can't. Such a small percentage of actors have the ability to choose what they do. If you're working because you have to pay bills, then you have to adapt even more than an actor who chooses to work, who has the freedom and the sort of success to choose. It's a tough one.
Do you find that you have to almost take what great directors were feeding you or giving you or allowing you to do, that quote direction there? Do you find yourself like self-directing based on that in other things where you're not getting that same kind of food?
I think sometimes if I'm finding a scene difficult or a moment a bit not quite right, I try and find a way in myself, and I try and find a way. I'm thinking, okay, if I'm feeling uncomfortable, there are only so many variables around me that I can control and change. So how can I incorporate the change within myself? So I sort of try, that's when technique is really helpful. And I think that's why I loved going and working on the Meisner technique so much, is that it gave me a technique for when I need a technique because something is not feeling right. But I think I've always tried, and that was the one of many pieces of advice that Lars gave me. He said, Stacy, you have to fight with the camera. You are too nice to the camera. You have to fight. If the camera is in front of you, the camera is in your way. And it was such a contradictory thought, but in the same time, it freed me up totally. And it took the responsibility that I was taking on my shoulders of being filmed. It took it away. And I just thought, it is not my job to be filmed. It is the DP's job to film me. My job is to act. And it sort of freed me up totally. So when I get bogged down on certain things, sometimes I'm like, okay, where do I feel that this is right? Is it sitting down or is it standing up? And then if there's a discussion with the director, we talk about it, and then you find a way. And sometimes it might go their way and you have to accept it. But at least you've sort of gone through that process of understanding something, and you're going, okay, I'm making an informal choice. It's not the one I wanted to make, but you make peace with it.
I think you might have hit on something there. I was I was really scared of you in that movie. I think you plowed down the camera. That gave you a power there that overwhelmed the audience. And we want to be overwhelmed. Like a lot of people talk about this first experience with the camera and how it's really intimidating and how it's, and sometimes they erase it, you know? But the idea of fighting it is so cool. And to be given that in your first film.
Yeah. I think also a lot of people, a lot of actors would start in theater and suddenly to then transfer into film. I think the scary thing is suddenly it's a big setup right in front of you. There's a lot of people around you. There's sound, there's people coming in your space, there's light, and you have a lot of things to manage in your personal space. And on top of that, you have to be vulnerable because now you have to say goodbye to your dying mother, or you have to, propose. It's a really tough one. And I think avoiding the reality of where you are is counterintuitive. You've got to take it in. It is in front of you. If you accept it, then you'll be able to do a lot more than if you just deny it. Because then if you're denying something that's in front of you, I find that you're only going to about maybe 70% of what you can give. Because you're constantly going, oh, there's the camera here. Oh, there's the camera, there's the camera, there's the camera. Oh, got to be careful. There's the camera and the light and this. And I just don't think that's a very enjoyable way of working.
When you have to play someone that lived or that is alive, like Anne Wiazemsky passed away sadly right before the film came out, which we call here Godard, Mon Amour. Did you meet Anne in preparation for that?
No,
And did you ever meet her before she passed?
I did. I would have loved to meet her prior, and I would have loved to spend more time with her. But for this film, she was so present in the script. Mm-hmm. It was so clear that it was her story that Michel and I, talking about the very practical fact that I looked nothing like her, it sort of became very clear that, in contrast to what Louis Garrel was doing, who was doing a very, very close identical work to Godard, we needed to have a bit more freedom with Anne's character and actually use all of Godard's muses as references and make some sort of collage of all of them. And that was something that I got really excited about, because there's someone who is very real, whose story is very real. So you don't want to upset or deny that story, but at the same time, it's like adding chili flakes. You know, you kind of just going, oh, but remember Anna Karina, and remember this person, and why don't we just use, you know, a lot of the best of everyone? And so that was sort of a choice that we'd made quite early on. And then I met her, we were at Cannes for the premiere, and I was leaving to go to the red carpet, and I had this dress that had a trail. And I am not good with trails, but someone walked on it, and I sort of turned around. I was like, I'm so sorry. I should be holding this. I don't know what I'm doing. This is absurd. I've got expensive jewelry everywhere. And it was her. It was Anne. And so it's like a really surreal, kind of perfect meeting. And then we walked the stairs together. And I'll always remember how emotional she was. Like, she finally got space to tell her story and space to tell who she was. And she was, it was a really very emotional moment, and very sadly she passed away. But it was almost like she was able to say goodbye in a very weird, you know, sometimes life just happens in ways. And we were all so shocked. And I weirdly as well, I was just starting another film. It was like my first day of rehearsals on this other film when I got the news. So there's just so many things happening. I was like, oh God, what's happened? What is this? What is she trying to say?
I was actually with Anna Karina when she was told that you guys were making this movie.
No way. And
it was in New York, and the filmmaker Kaveh Zahedi, I work for him sometimes, and he's a friend of mine. He was interviewing her. I said, I wanted to be around Anna Karina, so I said, let me do the sound, even though it wasn't necessary for someone to be there.
Anyone would, I'd be like, I'll do the sound.
Exactly.
I'll make coffee, I'll sweep, whatever you want.
He said to her, did you hear about the announcement that they're making Wiazemsky's book into a movie? And she said, that book? Really? Oh my God, I am shocked. It was sad and weird. You know, it was like a tour for the week in New York. Like, I was at a press conference a couple of days before that, a bunch of different screenings. It was really sad. And a lot of it was about Godard, you know, and a lot of it was about how there's still this sadness.
Yeah.
So it's so interesting what you said there, though, because in that movie, one of my favorite scenes is watching The Passion of Joan of Arc. And of course, anybody who knows the history and the story and the movies knows that is referencing Anna Karina in the audience and Viva sa vie. And to have that connection, I'm hoping that Anna Karina saw this movie. Do you have any idea if she did? I
have no idea. I know that Anne Wiazemsky saw it. And I don't know if Godard saw it. I feel like he would have seen it because he watches everything. But I don't know if she's seen it. I think he's, you know, when you have someone as prolific as him, and when he's worked with such wonderful people. It's like you reminisce. It suddenly brings you back to a part of your life that was so significant to you, but also to others and to cinema. You can't help but be, I guess, melancholic almost.
Yeah.
And just, that whatever your story is with this person, well, there are other stories with him as well. I mean, for example, with Lars, when he made the house that Jack built, it was almost a process of not grief, but I was just devastated that he'd moved on.
Yeah.
Even though I made loads of films and I worked with other directors, but the fact that he'd made another one, I was devastated and ecstatic as well. But there was a thing of, wow, we don't have that's no longer just mine. Like he's now has other actors and it's a great film. I think it's one of his best, but I remember that feeling of kind of almost being bereft.
At this point, I have to tell anyone who's listening, there is going to be spoilers about this great film, Archive. I do not want to talk about Archive without spoilers. I really hope people just go in to see this like I saw it, which was not knowing one darn thing, and then also just thinking, well, this is probably a low budget movie. It didn't feel like that.
Yes, Gavin Rothery, the director, I mean, he is so wonderful because he had such a vision for this film.
You can tell.
And seeing the film, I remember for the first time, I knew because he would constantly tell me what things would look like and what would happen and what he wanted to do in between takes and certain shots of nature and technology. But it almost kind of blew my mind.
Yeah.
I was completely taken from it. It was,
One thing that is really, it could have been a real pitfall in this movie was on your shoulders, which is the way you embody the robots could have really sent this whole experience into the cheese factory. You really hit all of that. So how did you approach that aspect of this work?
It was a first for me because I'd never played a robot, and what does that mean? What does it mean that does she feel the same way? How do I do this? And the great thing is that Gavin knew exactly where each robot was emotionally, what was needed of each phase of the robot that I played, J3, because she evolves, and the changes that would be necessary for me to make. But also, and I think this comes back to why you find it so relatable in terms of the science fiction genre, is that all of the costumes were not CGI. So when I am my first phase of being a robot, that is me fully in a robot suit. They only CGI'd my legs away until I was allowed to have legs.
Yeah.
And I think that gave it a sense of reality.
Yes.
And a sense that this is not just someone having fun in their studio doing great stuff because technology is exciting. This is someone who's really thought through and who loves technology, but who also understands storytelling. And so I would spend probably about 4 to 5 hours, depending on which phase we were at, every morning getting ready.
Wow.
So my call times would be 4, 3 a.m. But you enter this strange mindset where you're just like, this is what is necessary.
So this must have been one of those outside in heavenly actor type things where you put on the thing and you're right in the mood for this role.
Yeah, because you have preconceptions of what it could be to be a robot, and you have, if anyone, or if you ask a child to play a robot, they will somehow be very similar interpretations. And so I didn't really want to go down that line. I didn't want it to be gimmicky. So really, until I tried the costumes on, or until I had white paint everywhere, I couldn't really understand what my character was going through. And then suddenly I was so restricted in so many, I mean, half of the beginning phase of J3, when she's on her sort of mount, she doesn't move.
Right.
So I can't move. So you're asking an actor who uses their body physically as their tool for work to not move. That's like a very specific energy. And it was very rigid. So that added something else. And I used all of those elements and those sensations to feed into what her psyche would be. Sort of, why is she feeling trapped? Oh, well, there are many reasons why one would feel trapped in this situation, because I feel trapped in this situation.
Right. The ending changes everything that we saw. And this is why I needed to have a spoiler alert here. But was there this strange worry about what you have to do in your performance, which is both for the experience of the person watching it the first time, and then trying to retroactively think about what they just saw and having that have to work too? Like, was that something you had to think about as an actor?
Yeah, I did think about it. I did think about it in a sense that you're watching a reality that is suddenly negated. And I think one thing that's incredible with science fiction is that people love to watch science fiction films over and over again. And I remember Gavin telling me that he'd watched Solaris about 20 times, and that every time he watched it, he saw something new. And I thought, well, this is interesting, and this is unlike anything I've ever done before. So how do we incorporate something like that consciously? And I thought, well, I'm playing a robot. There's already a lot there visually.
Yeah.
So the work for the first time viewer is done visually very easily.
Yes.
The rest, I thought, there's got to be hints that something is off. And it was about finding moments, about little moments where you think, oh, it's just a little head tilt. But actually maybe that head tilt, when you watch it again, might mean something else. And you might start seeing it more and more when you watch it. But to someone who's just watching it for the first time, you think, oh no, it's just a little head tilt.
Yeah, that's
shows
cool.
Compassion. It was really scary as well, because I wasn't familiar with this process in any way. And just having Gavin really know so much about his script and about the characters, and he would tell me little stories about them on set, and he would just say, when this had happened and you looked at this element really weirdly, it's like that. And he was such a great sort of guidance to just experiment. And we did experiment a lot. We did a lot of different things. And then you come to the edit room, and that's also a very big job for a science fiction film, because you have to make sure that everything is super tight and that nothing is left aside.
The legendary actress Carroll Baker from Baby Doll, Ilya Kazan, I talked to her on the show. It was frustrating because when you read her autobiography and you look at her life, she had this role. Her first role was this sexual person, brilliantly, with so much depth there, like Brando level worked in my mind.
I think it's one of the best film performances I have seen.
There's
like a
completely
few,
agree
and I
with you.
think that one for me just made me so overwhelmed, and so I just could not stop watching it. There was something so strange and alive, like this aliveness that she gave to this is incomparable to a lot of stuff.
Yes, I agree entirely with every word you just said. But what happened was she unsuccessfully tried to dodge, these sex kitten roles right up until, she had to feed her family, had to keep doing them, and went down this road. I heard you talk about how you had to avoid over-sexualized roles after Nymphomaniac, and you have successfully done that. But I wanted to know, is this a constant battle? Are there people still trying to push you, otherwise well-intended people that don't understand what you want to do?
Less so now. I would say when Nymphomaniac came out, it was a lot. I mean, people had never seen me. They didn't understand that I was an actor. They didn't know if I had an agent or not. They didn't understand, I kind of came out of nowhere. And so a lot of, I think there was not suspicion, but a lot of unwillingness to see anything else. And it's an unwillingness that kind of happens very easily because it's a very strange industry that we work in, and I had to really reassure myself that saying no to work and saying no to jobs or certain things wasn't going to cost me jobs later down the line, or a part that I would really love to do later down the line. But I knew that if I weren't to ever act again, I would have had my best experience so far. And so I felt like if people cannot see my work beyond the character, then I shouldn't be working with them. And that was sort of what kept me going. And my agents, to their credit, were so supportive and have always fought for me and have always believed in me in a way that goes way beyond Joe in Nymphomaniac. But it is strange that people assume that is what one is good at.
Yeah.
It's like, well, first of all, you would never say that to a male actor. So why is this discussion suddenly allowed? Is it because I'm female? Is it because I'm less experienced? I've had people tell me oh, you should feel lucky. The only reason you got so far is because you got naked. And it's like, well, I can either let that in and upset me and stress me out, or I can say, well, you know what? I've actually worked with this person. I've worked with this person. I like my job. I'm proud of what I've done. I'm proud of saying no. And you power through. But it's very tough for actors, I think, to constantly have to battle against something that isn't a part of what they want to do.
Stacy Martin, thank you so much.
No, thank you. I loved this.
Back to One is a production of Filmmaker Magazine, which is a publication of IFP, the Independent Filmmaker Project. Listen to back episodes of this podcast at filmmakermagazine.com or wherever you get your podcasts.